Okay, hey everyone. Happy that we're here rounding about our journey, and we're gonna finally close up today by the end of this reading session, our book 4, the metaphysical book of Kepler's Harmonies of the World. So we should have really finished this last week, but I was so sick as a dog that I couldn't push through the the mind body battle was victorious on the side of the body over mind, and I collapsed. But I could see the passion in everybody there that they wanted to soldier on. So today, at least, we'll get that satisfaction. I'm gonna do a little short screen share because I noticed that Kelly and Helena had sent me some drawings, and I had totally missed them until really recently. So we'll just quickly review the proofs, the constructions that Helena first, and then Kelly had sent. Kirsten in Basel had also sent something that I'll show, but I didn't even get a chance to talk to Kirsten or anybody about them, so I'm not too sure if these proofs are necessarily true or not. They're unique approaches to the construction, specifically of the Pentagon in the case of Kelly and Kirsten. So anyway, we'll look at them and see what's going on here. So first, let me do a screen share. Can everyone see my screen right now? Yeah, okay. So this is what I received from Helena. Is it Helena or Helen?
It's Helene.
Helene. Okay, I was wrong on both counts. Okay.
Okay.
So Helene sent this, and I think this is pretty damn close to the mark as far as one of the most simple proofs of the construction or of the Pythagorean theorem, why it's true. Um, Helene went through a lot of different angles to get to this point here, but I think this is pretty close to it. Helene, are you satisfied with what you did here? Do you feel like you understand why a squared plus b squared equals c squared through what you did?
In this particular one, absolutely not. I feel like Costello on who's on first. Okay. See, I don't even know what I'm talking about.
Well,
Just
I
on this,
guarantee you,
the
if
other ones I thought were easier.
okay. Well, this one, I think of all of the ones you did, came as close to a universal proof. However, I think one of the things, because I mean, you basically demonstrated that there's a broader square that occupies the framing in which the entire a squared plus b squared to these two smaller squares, when added together, create c squared. So you created a framing around which that physical geometric expression occurs, and that is a bigger square. You used a bunch of triangles that were replicas of your original triangle that occurs when you look at the relationship of these two smaller squares to the larger square. So you made these replicas of that original triangle, and you started placing them around. I think that if you continue to play with this, maybe fill in this gap here. Maybe see what happens with maybe filling in this one gap here, where you could put a triangle, as sort of a mirror image to your original one.
Okay, so I took, can you hear me? Am I
Yeah,
still?
I can
Yeah.
hear you. I can hear you.
So I took the ones that are around this big square and I, flipped them, like inverted them, but they didn't match up. There was a square in the middle missing, like a little square in the middle. So I don't know, because I got your email about an hour after you sent it today, and I was like, uh-oh. So I hurried up and got my stuff that was all like scattered in a mess and tried to put it back together. And I just I couldn't I couldn't do what you said. So
Okay. Well, it's so close. It's so close. You got it. Like I
tell
can't.
me, it's the last class.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
okay. All
Helen,
right, Quan, do you want to
yeah,
say something?
yeah. Yes, Helen, you got the first part, okay? You got the first part when you put the four right angle triangles with the hypotenuse to the inside to show that you can construct a square called C square, okay? That's the image that we see at the bottom. That's the first part of the demonstration. So I suggest you to play with the order, with the just rearrange the four right angle triangles, because the second part is that you would have to make appear the two square called a square and b square. but you already make appear the square called C square. So you
But
already have
she has the a squared and b squared here too. This is the a squared. Here's the b squared, and here's the c squared. So she has the three squares.
yes, but she would still need to.
Okay, okay,
You have to. The missing part is you would have to say y a plus a square plus b square equal to c square. Okay,
okay.
that is the missing part.
Can I guess it? Because I think I might know. Because
Okay.
after I put all of the four triangles around the big square and I
Yeah.
inverted them and I got the little square, is that the same size as this little square here? Or no?
When you say the little square,
Just a little- oh,
which one?
sorry, you can't see me pointing. So the
Okay.
smaller the a, well, which one's a squared and which one do you call it?
Yes, that's the small one. That a square.
squared here plus b
Yeah.
squared here.
Yes.
These two
And
smaller squares added
yes.
together give you c
C
squared,
square. Yeah.
around which you put the four triangles that were equivalent to
Yeah.
your first triangle.
Exactly. But you would have to arrange the four right angle triangles in another configuration that will show that together they will give C square. That is the missing part.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll go with what you say.
Yeah. Yeah. I just play with the four right angle triangles, and that play should bring you to make appear a square and b square, but in such a configuration.
Hello. Uh-oh.
That it will, that second configuration is of the same size that the first configuration, with the four hypotenuses to the inside making C square.
Yeah.
Okay.
I love the idea of the extra big square covering all the three squares.
Yeah, it's a great concept. It's
Yeah.
definitely something. There's a lot there.
Yeah, there's a lot of information there.
Helen, the Chinese the Chinese in high antiquity had three proofs for the Pythagoras theorem. The first one is the same than the one by Pythagoras. The second and the third one resemble a little bit to what you have done, but not exactly.
Yeah.
But it's not the Chinese proof what you have done, okay? Because we still what you have done resemble to the classical Pythagorean demonstration.
Yeah.
But you can have to rearrange the four right angle in the second configuration, but using only four right angle triangles to make appear a square and b square, and to say that that figure has the same size than the figure of C square, meaning the figure with the four hypotenuses to the inside.
Yeah, and I would just add one way to think about this as well. If you imagine, because you could sort of fill in with your mind's eye this gap here, right? Like if you look here, you already have a square, right? If you follow my cursor,
Yes.
do you see that square?
Yes.
If you could demonstrate that square, what the relationship of that square would be as a size compared to the square you just created here. So you just made this big square here too.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. You'll have two squares. If you can compare the relationship of the size of those squares, your mind can probably find a reason why these two smaller squares will added together make this bigger square, and it'll satisfy you. So
Yeah.
I'll just leave it there. I feel I already said too much, but Kwan said a lot. I just said probably too much. All right, let's look at the next thing. Kelly. Kelly sent this construction of the Pentagon, and I did not build the Pentagon this way. I find this fascinating, and I had to reconstruct what Kelly did. And he, Kelly was kind enough to label the vertices of his different points pretty well. A2, B, C, C2, right? Got an F here. And from there, Kelly was able to do something which might be it might be the solution. I'm not sure. But Kelly, could you explain how your mind was thinking? What made you work with, I suppose you first did the A-B relationship as the side of the square, the A-B-A, right? Because that's a 90-degree angle from the A to the B. Or how are you going about this?
Yeah, it's hard to see on there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'm drawing the hypotenuse for the triangle. So they're like the right angle triangle inside the
The circle.
equilateral triangle, and then another line I needed to have was the side of the square, and then like that's also the hypotenuse, I think is the correct word. And then somehow it's like, well, these two lines, they gotta somehow I just felt they were related somehow. So
Okay. Well, I tried to reconstruct your demonstration. So this is my demo trying to trace back your steps. And I noticed that what you were doing here in yours is you had a square and a triangle relationship. So I saw that you built the square, the ABA square, that's the black shape there.
right.
And I noticed that you built the triangle as well. The AC is the side yeah, AC being the side of a
Yeah,
triangle, right?
yeah.
So I built the side of the triangle, and I noticed that you looked at where they both crossed paths at this point E here. So
Yeah,
you
like
noticed that
they're both the hypotenuse. So in my mind, it's like I don't really know the lengths of that, but I know that they're related, and well, that's where they crossed, and it's like,
Mhm.
well, the Pentagon side has to be somewhere. It has to be related to that somehow.
Yeah, it's like it's longer than the C and it's shorter than the B. Um, as far or it's longer than let's say AC would be, and it's shorter than AB would be. So you decided that by crossing this vertices here with E, the point where the triangle and square cross over inside the circle, you extend that onto the edge of the circle, getting E, we call it E1 here. And that length A to E1 gives you the side, which wraps around pretty damn well 5 times. It wasn't perfect. I don't know if maybe it was because my compass wasn't perfect, but yours as well had the similar thing, and you wrapped
Uh,
it around 5 times.
yeah, I did like several drawings, and um, yeah, I think it works.
I think it works too. I think we have to think about a little bit more what the hell is going on. Um, but I feel like that might very well be one of several solutions to this. Could be wrong, but I think we have to. It's worth thinking about a lot more. What's going on there? Why would this be the case? Why would that line here that extends from a vertices of this of the a vertex of the square all the way through that crossover point of the square triangle connection and touches onto the circumference of the circle? Why would that generate a length which would be the solution concept for the Pentagon? I think it's a wonderful construction and not that different from something Kirsten did. So Kirsten in Basel sent a very, I mean, she always makes these very beautiful geometric proofs. I have to sit down with Kirsten as well over Zoom and actually have her draw it out for me step by step because I find it difficult, though I feel like she's possibly doing something similar to you, except dealing with triangles and squares on the outside instead of on the inside of her original circle. I feel like she's sort of doing what you are also doing, Kelly.
Yeah,
But again, for Kirsten's case as well, I need to sit down and actually walk through it step by step to see what are her rational actions, what is causing her judgments step by step as she's coming up with this fivefold division of the circle. Otherwise, if it's just beautiful, and if both of you guys did strike at a solution I've never seen before, I'm really thankful. I'm very excited about that.
I like to know what the normal uh, procedure is. I haven't read any books about it yet, so So
Yeah,
maybe you can show us.
well, yeah, and I could, maybe I could. And Kepler does actually in book 1 of his of the Harmonies. He has an extended exploration of the construction of the Pentagon. Which is again, it's always difficult without a whiteboard and actual compasses to go through some of these things. But if you want to go through book 1, look for his work on the Pentagon, those axioms and postulates that break it down, and he takes you through the steps of its construction the way he does it. That involves taking a triangle or a square, a rectangle with one side of the rectangle being the length 2, and the other side of the rectangle being length 1, right? Creating then you could take that rectangle, which is basically 2 squares side by side, cut it in half, so that now you have a hypotenuse, and you can easily get the hypotenuse, knowing simply that one side is 1, the other side is 2, and then you could play with that. You could extend that line of that hypotenuse. Well, anyway, I don't want to say any more, and it's going to be too abstract with me just using words.
Well,
But
I was trying
No, but
It
something.
makes a lot of sense when you just use the 1 and 2.
yeah,
giving
but I
you-
think but I think Matt, you're right. The idea is to make is to identify a right angle rectangle within the Pentagon, and with that, you will be capable to calculate the side, because one of the side of the right angle triangle is the hypotenuse, and that hypotenuse is the radius of the circle.
mm-hmm.
So you have one number, you have one digit, I mean.
I was also playing with ones where I'm trying to do this golden ratio thing, trying to figure that out. You had one picture there before, I forget who posted it, where they were making the hypotenuse, like everyone was like a root 2, root 3, root 4, root 5.
Oh, that was Steven. Yeah, Steven did that. Yeah.
And I was trying to do something like that, but like in a reverse kind of way. And I spent a lot of time on it, but I didn't get anywhere.
Yeah, but root 2, you know that it's a historical event. One of the students of Pythagoras just showed that if you have a right angle triangle with the sides equal to 1, the hypotenuse would be root 2. And that Hippasus has been killed because he demonstrated the existence of irrational.
Mm-hmm.
That video we saw last week as well.
Yeah.
I found it fascinating. A lot to digest there. I don't know if you remember where it was showing pictures. I actually, I'm not even sure if the video was, if you showed it or if it was a link to a YouTube video where, oh, geez.
Are you speaking of the video of from Harvard?
Or was it from last Sunday?
What was the video? We watched a few things.
Well, we're doing. It was showing how the squares fit in.
The algebra.
The algebra, yeah, that's right.
That was Sunday.
And I thought, geez, that's so related to what we're doing.
Oh, you're talking about the class, the RTF class. Okay,
that's right. I'm sorry.
Right, Kevin Champagne's presentation. That's right.
Yeah, that was incredible.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah, that has relevance on this big time. Absolutely. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, let's do the following. And I mean, honestly, this does open up the door very, very much so to a study of what Gauss was doing when Gauss not only was working at complex numbers, but the whole complex domain, this anti-Euclidean geometry that was developed by somebody who was a follower of Kepler long after Kepler died, almost 200 years later, Carl F. Gauss, who was actually made an astronomical coup in a sense, where none of the astronomers of all of Europe, the best trained, were able to discover the orbit of a new celestial object that had caught people's eye, that came to be what Gauss discovered to be the asteroid belt in which the asteroid series exists, and that we now know today as being a place where there's millions of asteroids, big and small. The asteroid series being one of the biggest, and so people couldn't figure out where this was located. And he was able to, at an age of like 23 or 22, something ridiculously young, trump all of the greatest minds of Europe, using a very new approach to physical geometry that allowed him to forecast where Ceres was going to be located, and it was right what he did. And there's a lot of evidence that points to the fact, even though he didn't make his method as transparent by any measure as Kepler did, but despite the fact that he didn't make it transparent, one could reverse engineer his method, looking at what he was reading, who his teachers were, what his influences were, and see that he was actually utilizing Kepler's harmonic geometries in order to generate his solution concept, which involved a deep analysis into not only numbers, square roots, but also negative numbers that are square rooted, the so-called imaginary numbers that he saw as being extremely important, not for the sake of them just being fun tools to resolve geometric or algebraic problems, but rather that these were opening up the door to a higher physical geometry, a whole world called the complex domain. That was so important for Carl Gauss. And the prime numbers, especially negative prime numbers that were square rooted, super important concepts, and it just changed everything. So maybe we'll maybe figure out a way to look at that at some point in the future. And Quan actually had a really interesting introductory video that works really nicely to open up the door to understand how Gauss's imaginary numbers are not imaginary at all, but very real. So that's something we could maybe do in the future.
Yeah. And what is outstanding in that is not that it was something complicated in the numerical process, but simply a jump of the imagination. Mm-hmm. Okay, when we say that it's a question of epistemological overture, it's precisely a perfect illustration of epistemological overture.
Mm-hmm.
The man had many talents because he's remembered probably more in some ways for, I think it's a measurement of magnetism, the Gauss.
Magnetism, that's how I know him. Yeah.
And I know him because I worked as an audio engineer years ago when I was at university. We had an 8-track tape player. And being a university, we didn't have a lot of funds for brand new tapes for recording. So we were constantly de-Gaussing the tapes that had information on it, which would just simply realign all of the magnetic particles on the tape so you were ready to re-record.
He has a unit of magnetism named after
it's a unit of magnetism. You know, how many Gauss?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, man of many talents.
Well, it was all part of the same thing, right? Because even when you look at what he was doing with his, because that's one of the only times one uses the imaginary numbers in experimental physics is when you're dealing with electricity and magnetic fields. You have to use these imaginary numbers, but located on a very different type of upgraded sort of XY grid. And Gauss was the innovator of this entire way of using imaginary numbers as a sign of rotational functions instead of simply being an algebraic sort of symbolic sort of tool. And he did it specifically in order to have a tool by which he could carry out his explorations into magnetic fields. And his work, he's the one who coordinated the international network of Humboldtian scientists. Alexander von Humboldt was following this and working very closely with him when they were mapping out the magnetic fields of the Earth. A huge endeavor. And but so his mathematical work and his physical geometric work were always connected, but it was his physical geometric explorations which were always dominant. And today that's sort of one of the ways that we've been induced to lose the soul of Kepler or Leibniz or Gauss, as we were told, oh, they're just mathematicians, and the math is much more important than physics in all of the cases. So you only need to memorize Kepler's formulas, and you don't need to know about his harmonic concepts of the universe. That doesn't matter because it's not useful. What's more useful is his formulas. Same thing for Gauss or for Leibniz, you know, and it kills the soul of what made all of these formulas possible in the first place. Sleight of hand.
But also, if you remember the history of how the imaginary number appear, it was called impossible numbers first, because when they were trying to resolve the third degree equation, the cubic equations by Cardano and so on, they arrive at those square root of negative numbers. And of course, at the time, it was considered as impossible. Thus, the I, that I will become the imaginary number later on. But what I want to say with these is that sometimes you will bump into mathematical notions that because you're daring enough to keep them, you will have to wait for a century or two before your exploration of physical reality will be deep enough. So those mathematical functions could be useful or could be correlated with phenomenal reality. Okay, so there might be a difference in the rhythm of discovery of mathematical entities versus the discovery of phenomenal realities that would be described by those mathematical entities.
Amen.
After
Absolutely.
all, for practically 100, after all, for practically 150 years, some daring soul just said, okay, just keep those impossible numbers and just use them like numbers, and we will see. Okay, and because they were daring enough to keep them, that at a certain moment they manifest as something useful to be correlated with phenomenal realities.
Right.
And it's a little bit what we are living now with the Schrodinger equation, for example, because the Schrodinger equation is perfectly given by the Hamiltonian operator, the sum of the potential energy and the kinetic energy of an electronic system, but there is no physical image that is adequate for now correlating that equation.
Interesting. Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that the maths is false, but the maths is perfectly correct because it predicts everything. But the jump of imagination is lacking.
I feel uncomfortable with the whole, just the word imaginary. It just doesn't
really
fit.
It's
Why?
like an impossible burger. But
Huh?
I've been
Well, to me,
I've been actually trying to approach that subject, that very subject, and I'm just tentatively trying to research it because I don't have a background in it. And it's
Well, for
I don't
those who
have a
doesn't
handle
know
on it at all.
the theoretical basis
Yeah.
of quantum mechanics, it's a perfectly outstanding mathematical theory because in terms of prediction, it's perfect. Okay, but in terms of correlation with physical reality, it's not perfect.
Yeah.
So the problem is not in the math.
I don't worry about that. I'm just worried about
descriptive term.
Yeah, the descriptive term, the whole concept. Like when we talk numbers, we know, like I know real numbers like 1, 2, 3, and then when you talk about, something imaginary or even something negative, it's especially with the philosophy kind of talk that we're having, you want your whole brain to understand that concept fully, and it'll just take time for me.
Well,
And
I could say for sure Kepler didn't like the word irrational numbers, and he actually said in this very book that we're reading in an earlier chapter, he said we should change the name irrational numbers to inexpressible numbers because they are perfectly rational, and we're slandering the number by giving it such a name. And it turns off the mind because you're like, we're rational, our minds are rational, but if these numbers are irrational, it means our mind can't know them. But he's like, no, we can know them, we just can't express them in number. That's different.
But it's here I want to play the devil's advocate because rational comes from Latin ratio, meaning simply a number over another number. Okay, so you cannot express it as a rapport of a whole number on another number, meaning you can express it as a fraction. That's all. Okay, but I understand that the word inexpressible is maybe interesting in the sense that unhappily, unfortunately, rational also has the meaning of reason and not simply ratio.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well,
Can
that
I
which
ask-
compares. Yeah.
Mhm.
But
So somehow we got to make the unrationable rationable.
no, that's not possible if you take the first meaning of ratio, okay? Because it's simply the ratio of two numbers. So I'm sorry to insist on that, okay? Because it's here that we have to be open epistemologically. We have to understand that a word has many meanings, okay? And if you take the strict meaning of a rapport, of a ratio between two numbers, there's nothing so catastrophic in that. It's simply a description.
Well, Shakespeare said a rose by any other name would smell as sweet, right? So
Yeah,
always have to look for the essence of something instead of getting thrown off by the label that it's given by humans, fallible humans over time.
exactly. So we have to live with the fact that a word has many meanings.
Yes.
Mhm.
So
Okay.
we cannot, so you can't, I mean, wouldn't like debt be like considered negative numbers?
Death.
Debt.
Yeah, sure. And I'm happy you say that, Helen, because I was going to say to Kelly 5 minutes ago that maybe it's not a good way for him, but if you think to money, it's very easy to understand all the bizarre stuff related with numbers.
Mm,
Mhm.
mm.
Okay.
I can't help it. I'm a little bit like Kelly
Oh,
there. I mean,
you know
changing
the
description.
the
Sorry.
famous Euler number, okay,
Mm.
has been discovered because of the bankers. So don't think that because he was observing the heavens that he discovered that number. He discovered that numbers because of the bankers.
Mm.
Well, just one fellow was talking about unified field theory, and he was saying that it was 1/5 to the power of -3. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna try to figure out where you're coming from.
What? I didn't
Yeah,
understand.
no, for real. That's what he
For
was.
real.
I'll share it with you,
One
Matthew. I'm
over
sorry I
5
haven't
to the
shared
power
more.
of -3. 1/5 to the power of -3.
1/5.
Yeah.
Phi.
Phi. Okay, phi.
Phi.
Sorry, I thought
Phi.
it was 5. Phi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Have
he
you-
uses the golden mean to express a lot of that. But I'll share the
Yeah.
video with Matthew,
Okay.
and he
Yeah, share
can
the video. Share the
make
video. Let's
sense
do
of
that.
it, because
And
there's a
we
lot
should
of weird stuff out there. I'm
we
trying to
should-
figure it out.
Okay.
Yep.
So share the video into the Telegram group. Now we should get onto the reading so we can
Yes.
actually finish Kepler's book for today, and we will. I think we ended around page 371 last week. So
Yep.
let's maybe reread a few paragraphs just to get back into the flow, starting at the bottom of 370. Keeping in mind, he's looking at now, he's intervening on the entire school of astrologers, of astrology, and Kepler is somebody who has created the new astronomy, so a whole new field of philosophy, metaphysics, and practical physical science that didn't exist before Kepler. So he did that through his new astronomy published in 1609. He did this with his third law that is the culmination of his life's work in this book. And one of the biggest blocks is superstition, and a lot of superstitious habits that were predominant in the minds of anybody who were allowed to look at the stars. And they had certain mathematical models that they were allowed to abide by when they plugged in their data and generated their forecasts that would be used generally for political reasons to figure out, well, what is your destiny? At what alignment or configuration of the stars is it worthy for you to, or expedient for you to launch into battle, to declare war, declare peace? So the court astrologers had a huge amount of influence on the battlefield, in courts, and beyond. And this was really holding back people from understanding or making the discoveries of what were those principles organizing the behavior of activity on the earth that was related to the heavens. And so, in the last reading, Kepler reviewed certain relationships regarding the aspects of the different planets at either conjunction or core angles, 45 degree, 60 degree, 90 degree, 135, the core angles that we find within the elementary polygons inscribed within a circle. And what type of behavior in terms of weather occurred here on the earth in terms of living systems? Were there any relationships that were discoverable? And he's really reframing and retooling what astronomy is, because up until now, there's a fetish with just looking at angles and not thinking about the quality of what the entire solar system is doing and the quality of those geometries, those aspects first. People tend to think of the numerical number of the angular distance alone when coming up with their flowery assessments of what the future will be, rather than thinking about, something much more bounded by reason. So this is what Kepler's doing. He's not discarding all of astrology. He himself, that's part of his gig, right? How he pays his bills. But he is absolutely overthrowing the all of the superstitious underpinnings of astrology and reframing it under something really, really new and cool. So, I guess one thing he's looking at as well is the similarity between the light emitted from the sun, or light emitted from the various stars, that goes outward in all directions spherically, right? And that is received at different intensities based upon the distance away from that point of the light source to us. As the light of the soul, we have all inside of us that spreads outwards. I mean, that's a metaphor. He's not being literal here, but that there's a sort of light within us that allows for a resonance to the external world. So light within and a light without that animates the behavior of the senses, that captures through the five senses that he's explored in previous chapters within this book. Either taste, smell, hearing, sight, touch, and that is then processed and recognized as qualities from something, a judging faculty within us. But so he has these common similarities regarding God's mind, the active creative mind of the entire universe that generated us and all within it, and that which we're exploring, plus the similarity of that which God's mind is made in the image of, which is us, animated by conscience and truth and reason, or at least the love of those things. So when that happens, there's a resonance. When that doesn't happen, there's no resonance. Things go bad on the earth, right? We miswire and we start undermining our own basis of happiness, and we go into wars. Like Kepler is living through. Keep in mind the early onset of the 30 Years' War. That's what he's living through. And he dies when the 30 Years' War of Christians killing Christians. Germany's male population is decimated by over half throughout the course of this devastating war of Protestants killing Catholics throughout the entire Holy Roman Empire. So he's trying to intervene. And he does it through a variety of ways that he knows how, and the devotional, the fact that he devotes his works to leading figures, political players who are making this thing happen. Keep in mind as well, this particular book, The Harmonies, is devoted to King James II, because he's trying to snap these leaders who have so much power at their disposal to do good or evil. He's trying to get them to realize that there is a provable harmony that God created, and that we have to align ourselves to and create our laws in harmony with that peace that is in the universe. And if we don't, we're defying not just the moral laws, but the actual physical principles, right? The physics of the law of the universe itself. So that's there. And if you take that intention away from Kepler as a motive and an identity as a man living in the world, you remove the ability, the power for him to have made these incredible revolutionary discoveries that he made. They go together, which is again something that a lot of modern scientists who have been retrained in Cambridge and a lot of the modern university system, they promote this mythos that you could ignore somebody's identity and reason for being and extract that away from their works, whether the artistic works or scientific works. They say they're two different things. They're not. They're the same. They're parts of the same whole. So keep that always in mind too. And I think from there we'll be able to just make sense of what Kepler's saying pretty clearly. And I figure this is the bottom of page 371.
Okay, can I speak up for just a moment?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, you started out saying something that he said about light within us.
Yeah.
And I think you comment like that's not real or that's not imaginary or something like that.
Why he's using the imagery of like a physical light within us that has one single source that he compares to the soul. I don't think he necessarily believes that there's one single physical light source physical within us that is the soul. I don't think he literally means it that way. I think these are it's a poetic allegory. As
You
far as I
didn't
see
know
it.
about biophotons, Matthew?
Okay, but it
I don't
is
think the
real.
biophoton is the soul. Do you think the biophoton is the soul? Okay.
No. I mean, what you were saying before though, about, kind of an imaginary radiation from a human being rather than a real concrete one. Biophotons are too small for us to see, but maybe our electromagnetic emanations from our body.
Oh yeah,
for
yeah. No.
example.
Kepler did believe that there was physical light within us. Yeah.
Yeah.
He did believe that, and that is true. There are every cell is emitting biophotons. Absolutely.
Yep,
Yes,
yep.
that's true.
Because I've heard about studies recently that, when we're in that place of peace and love and unity, we're actually even emitting more photons that travel farther.
I don't know. I would be happy to discover that were true, but I don't know if I don't know of what study that's been done to measure that, but it makes sense.
The Russian began studies called Kirlian photography.
Kirlian, yeah.
Kirlian photography, yeah.
Kirlian. It's a vast subject that I don't pretend to know, but if you want to explore that dimension, go to Kirlian photography.
They were measuring our aura.
Yeah, great pics. There's some great pics,
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
I can remember seeing
say,
some of
Matthew,
those. Sorry, I remember seeing some of those prior to the advent of something as simple compared to today as Photoshop. So what you were seeing was the result of, scientific experiments. It was real. You see the same thing online these days, and it could be just about anything.
Yeah. What was that, Susie?
I'm sorry, I'm trying to gather my words, because in everything that you said a few minutes ago, there was this moment where you were saying, like, it's not real. And then you went on into this explanation that to me proved it is real. We have to recognize that the light in us is real and it is from God. And we do need to resonate with the light that is in him instead of cutting ourselves off from it, because then we become like them that we're trying to get free of right now.
Yes.
I'll agree with that.
The metaphysical, the physical, subjective and objective, they have to come together.
Yes, that's true.
For us to move forward. I'm sorry, my heart is much more educated than my head. So I don't necessarily know how to say the right words to explain it, but the light in us is real and we need to start listening to it more. I'm going to hush now.
You're right. No, that's good. Yeah.
We'll all agree with that.
No problem there.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So how about we maybe go with, I'm trying to think, it's hard to find the good jump on point. So maybe here, let's because we were also talking about the question of the earth soul, the perceptive faculties within living and non-living properties that are moved by even if they don't have a human mind, they're moved by the ratios of the various planetary configurations. And he had developed to some length his concept of the planetary and specifically the Earth soul. So maybe we'll go with that as we then bring it up to the higher quality souls of human beings. But so how the Earth soul perceives an aspect being, what it is. Who would like to read today slowly? Who wants to be a slow reader today? An intelligent, slow reader.
I'd like to be that.
Oh, I'll do it.
Helene? Okay, Helene. All right.
All right, I'll start. If I get tired or my voice starts cracking.
You guys could switch around. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Right. So you want me to start at now 1 difficulty?
Yeah, I think that's a fine spot.
Now 1 difficulty, which was also touched on above, but lightly must be removed, that of the way and means of reception. For the reception by us men of the likeness of sensible things within our souls seems something acceptable and plain. For the apertures of the pupils by which they enter are in the open. The eye is that which forms the likeness. The crystalline fluid is that which controls the radiant beam. The net-like covering of the optic nerve is that which receives the picture of external things. Nothing of that sort is apparent in the body of the earth. No eye is here by which the soul of the earth may see the radiations of the planets and their angles. How then will it sense the light without vision? How will it perceive or receive the angles without an instrument? There is some difficulty, I confess, but if you consider the matter more deeply, it is common to both cases. Go to page 169 of my astronomical part of the optics. You will see the old complaint about human vision as well. For although the more careful opticians and medical anatomists confess that in that passage I have at last very firmly demonstrated the way of seeing after so many fruitless attempts by others, though Francis Aquilinus, Aquilonius,
Sure.
whose great work on the optics came out 4 years ago, has not seen my book, and so has to no purpose erected a new, exceedingly splendid structure on the old error about the way of vision. Yet that way of seeing does not extend beyond the net-like covering, where the fluids of the eye are transparent. There still remains the question not yet settled by the natural philosophers to whom I have appealed, how the picture of the thing which is to be seen, formed according to me on the net-like covering, is from there on received through the opacity of the body within the recesses of the soul. Does the soul proceed outward to meet it? And what hangs on that? I, however, as I frankly confess, concentrate more on vision than on the perception of the angle of the rays. About that, I think I am capable of some by no means inept babbling, although I am completely dumb on it. I could, isn't that crazy? I could indeed, without losing the main point, evade the toil of speculation and reply to the question by what eyes the soul of the earth sees the rays of the stars, by the same by which it saw the soldier with jagged boots, whose image it implanted in the cleft stone. However, laziness is the death of the philosopher. Let us live and exert ourselves. First, the soul has actually acquired the nature of a point, at least for the purposes of binding it to its body, potentially the shape of a circle, and as it activity, it spreads itself from that seat at a point into a circle. Or whether it has to sense external things and they surround it in a spherical way, or whether it has to control its body and it also has its body surrounding it, itself is concealed inside, rooted in its particular point from which it comes out by means of its emanation to the rest of its body. But how does it come out, except along straight lines? For that is truly coming out. How would it have any other manner of coming out, existing as light and flame, than other lights coming out of their sources? That is on the straight lines. It proceeds out then towards the outer parts of its body, according to the same laws as the lights which surround the firmament proceed in towards it as it resides at its point. Now the whole surface of half the earth's globe, and so all points on the surface of the atmosphere by which it is clothed, are irradiated by an affinity of rays from one and the same planet, and of all of them, a single one is directed toward that point, which is the seat of the soul. On the other hand, the soul comes out to all points on the surface of its body by an affinity of lines like the rays of the sun, because it is itself a kind of light, and the spirits commonly spoken of seem to be nothing else but these rectilinear rays and these emanations of the soul. Yet there is one line alone out of them all to be directed from the center to that point on the surface, which is struck by the single ray from the planet, which is directed towards the seat of the soul. Let us suppose then that perception of the rays of one planet occurs when the entry of the former and the exit of the latter coincide on one geometrical straight line, on a pattern very similar to vision, which is perfect and accurate on a single, unique, perpendicular, the central ray of the whole eye. Let us also suppose what in the dioptrics of proposition, 61, I have pressed home as the particular secret of all sensations, that no sensation of an external object occurs except insofar as the sensory instrument is affected by that object. For the soul has, by those outward passages of its emanations, reliable knowledge of all the members of its body and of the changes which occur in any one of them at any given time. From these suppositions, it follows that if such an impression comes from a planet to some point in the atmosphere, which is not in the direction of the seat of the soul, but past it to one side, the soul accepts the emanation from the point thus affected indeed through the return of its own emanation, but discounts it as something of no importance. If, however, such an impression comes to some point on the surface of the atmosphere, which is in the direction of the seat of the soul, the point thus affected is announced to the soul, and this sensation, as relating to the soul, is evaluated and distinguished from others. Hence, at that point alone, the soul makes an image of the star for itself, but at the others mentioned hardly at all. For the soul's ray is brought into action and, so to speak, illuminated by the star's ray, which coincides with on the same straight line. Just as the color of visible things is brought into action by the advent of light, and just as vision is brought into, I'm flipping the page here, action, when we are aware and take into account that we are seeing. When this is the case for not only one planet, but for two as well, the soul will also find two indications in two parts of its body, whether its body is in fact round or uneven and rough. The soul is surrounded by it in the manner of a sphere, as it is seated at a single point, and exhales it as it perfectly spherical, in whatever direction its body is evident, by rays which it puts out from itself round about, either by immaterial emanations or, as others do, by secondary action. Hence, it examines its body by reference to the idea of a circle, and indeed of a zodiac circle, drawn round its seat as center, and measures out its separate parts. So there is no need to concede that the earth is transparent right through to its center, nor that its soul goes right out to the stars. And yet the way in which the angles of the configurations are sensed by the soul is no less evident. By this supposition, indeed, all the arguments are rebutted which Pico Mirandola applied to overthrow the theory of the great conjunctions and of the aspects. For because the soul arranges all the bodies in the world round the point which its seat in imagination in the form of a sphere, and all the planets in the form of a circle, and that by the law of straight lines exceeding from a single point, it therefore makes no difference whether a star is large or small, whether it completes a large or small part of its path in the sky, or whether it is high or close to the earth. For all these things affect the soul just as they are perceived. However, they are perceived according to the same laws by which they are also seen by us. That is all as if equal in height and without any second motion, but equal in the speed of their first diurnal motion, and with no great
Rotation
difference.
around the sun.
What is that?
The daily rotation.
The diurnal motion, and with no great difference in their visible size. Look for the other replies which can be made to Pico's arguments in the passage to which I have often referred in my book on the new star. Enough for the present on the soul of the earth, which they call sublunary nature. Whatever has been said up to this point about the soul of the earth can also be applied similarly to the faculties of the human soul. However, in the case of the latter, many things are more obvious and more numerous in proportion as they are in control of more functions than the former.
Okay, so now we've shifted gears now after all of these pages towards now seeing the similarity and the differences of the human soul compared to the earth soul.
Okay. Indeed, on the chief faculty of the soul, which is called the mind, apart from what I have adduced from Proclus above in chapter 1, the business of the rays give no further formation for me to state at greater length. It is a point as mind, it is a circle as reason. It is an image of the divine countenance. It is a harmony inasmuch as it has a single activity. There are in it ideas and mathematical species by means of the circle. It gives to the latter and to the harmonies their intelligible essence. Let the reader look for all these things above here. There is no need to say more. I mention this single point from Proclus' arguments. The mind does not seem to depend on good examples, as he emphasizes that lines, surfaces, and the points must be established in the soul because there are no pure and distinct surfaces, lines, or points in sensible things. But a pure line subsisting on its own is not in the soul either, but it exists in a mental surface of which it is an extremity no less than in the case of sensible bodily qualities. An unmixed surface is in an extremity of a body, an unmixed line in the extremity of a surface, an unmixed point in the end of a line, where the essence of imperfect quantities is being in perfect ones.
I just want to say very quickly that this one little paragraph really caught me, because for anybody who's read Euclid's Elements, he sort of takes Euclid and turns him inside out, as he should be done, because Euclid does the very opposite of what Kepler is doing now by building up his geometry, by asserting one of his earliest axioms is the presumption that everything is made up first of points as a fundamental entity that has no breadth, zero breadth, width, or height. And that from points, we can accumulate these nothings to make lines, which are he defines as being the sum total of an infinity amount of points, which he already said has no existence. And that then surfaces are built up by the sum total of adding lines together, which have no width at all. They're just length. And then volumes are built up, bodies, by adding up these surfaces. So Kepler does the very opposite and starts from the standpoint, no, what's primary is body. And from there, one could see that you could get, you could take a surface, not a surface, sorry, a body, and then cut it and get a surface. So you could get a sphere first, cut the sphere, and you can get a circle. Fold the circle, you can get a line, right? Then fold the line, you can get a point. And from that standpoint, you have a much more rational basis because now existence governs every other property you could find, not non-existence. You don't assume that all of the discoverable reality is made up of non-existences, but rather existence is the governing thing.
Okay, you want me to continue?
If you'd like.
Okay. Of course, mathematical classes, in fact, are in the soul in a way no different from other universals and various conceptions abstracted from sensible things. But among mathematical types, that which is called the circle is in the soul by a far different method, not only as an idea of external things, but also as a sort of form of the soul itself. And lastly, as a single storehouse of all geometrical and arithmetic knowledge. The former of those is most obvious in the theory of signs, the latter in the wonderful business of logarithms is in those which arise from the circle. There is a sort of calculating machine of all the multiplications and divisions whichever take place as if they were already completed. But enough of the chief faculty of the soul. Let us now come to the lesser ones. The vital faculty in man then has with it not only the harmonies which are involved in bright rays, but also the harmonies which clothe types of sounds. The sound, indeed, it drinks in through the ears as their proper object, but the rays of the stars, in fact, it examines by reference to innate ideas of harmony, not as it admits them by the eyes, but by the same more obscure way of perception, which was expounded a little above. For things which are seen by the eyes are at the surface of reflection, but the recognition of the harmonies is without reflection. Thus, J.C. Scaliger accepts that the idea of a kite is innate in a young fowl, but that it is not simple, but accompanied by the sign of a calamity which it must flee. Hence, therefore, it is a property of human souls that at the time of heavenly aspects, they get extraordinary impulses to carry through the business which they have in hand. For what a goad is to an ox, what a spur or a jockey is to a horse, what a drum and bugle are to a soldier, what a stirring operation is to its oration, is to its audience, what a measure on flute, bagpipes, and pandora. Is that what that is? Pandora?
Some instrument.
Is to a crowd of rustics, that a heavenly configuration or appropriate planets is to all of them, especially when they are assembled together. Thus, they are both stirred up individually in their thoughts and deeds, and collectively made more ready to conspire together and to join hands. So in warfare, you may see that generally battles, fights, invasions, assaults, captures, disturbances, and panic terrors take place at the times of aspects of Mars and Mercury, Jupiter and Mars, the Sun and Mars, Saturn and Mars, and so on. And that in epidemics of disease, more people fall ill, are worse tormented, or even die at the time of powerful aspects. That is because nature is failing in the struggle with disease, to which struggle, but not to death, it is incited by an aspect. The heaven itself does not do these things without an intermediary, but the vital faculty of the soul, operating in partnership with the heavenly harmonies, keeps the leadership in this, as it is commonly called, influence of the heaven. Of course, this word influence has bewitched some philosophers into preference for sharing the madness of the common herd rather than my wisdom. how weak their chain really is, connecting the stars with the atmosphere with the constitution of the body, and then the body with the soul. Suppose that applies in certain cases, yet what has to do with an aspect? Yet what has it to do with an aspect, which is an entity of reason? How will the element of air grasp it, or the body? Unless each does so by its own soul, which first perceives the aspect in itself in the way which I have stated, that this vital faculty is a flame lit in the heart, and hence dies when its fuel is used up, whereas the mind is permanent. I have proved in my optical part of astronomy, page 26, by a very clear comparison between the heart and its reciprocal motions of systole and diastole, and an enclosed lamp in which the flame must be sustained by oil, ventilation, and the removal of smoke. On this property of its essence, then, chiefly depends the wonderful business of horoscopes. For since the vital faculty lit in the heart and burning as long as life persists is a kind of zodiac circle, since its essence consists in activity and in a flow of flame, as it were, the result is that the whole sensible shape of the zodiac flows into it when it has been freshly lit at birth, and it completely implanted into it, even though the heaven after the moment of birth goes on to all its other positions and changes its shape. On this spiritual idea of the circle of the zodiac, it marks all the positions which the planets and the rising point, setting point, and mid-heaven held against the fixed stars. Before other astronomical matters, much the greatest priority belongs to the radiant harmonies, along with the first origin and formation of this vital faculty in man. For we have stated that every faculty of the soul is a circle in respect of its essence, but as it acts on itself in some way by instinct, as that is to say, it compares its circle with parts of it. They are harmonic archetypes. Indeed, the vital faculty begins to act and continues in action from the instant when, through birth, it is ignited within the lamp of the heart, just as it has further need for breathing, that is to sustain the flame of life. When therefore it begins to be what it is at the time when it constructs the harmonies, then most of all the sensible radiant harmony of the planets flow into it. Is this indeed the reason why those who are born at a time of many aspects among the planets generally turn out hardworking and industrious, or are accustomed right from boyhood to accumulate wealth, or are born or chosen as governors of the state, or indeed devote themselves to study? If I seem to anyone to be able to stand as an example of that kind of life, I have not begrudged him information. I have not begrudged him information on my birth. In my book on the new star, page 43, and it will be convenient to expound it at this juncture also. I do not shrink from the charge of boasting, even though the charge is made by those boors, half-learned peddlers, to drive the people mad of titles and arms, even as Pico calls them, popular theologians who condemn this whole class of writing for stupidity, whether in speech or by their style of life. Before true lovers of wisdom, of whatever order, I easily clear myself of this charge by pleading the benefit to my reader, because there is nobody whose birth or internal disposition of mind I know by equally certain. Hold on. investigation. Jupiter then was very near the 19th degree.
90th degree.
Thank you. Jupiter then was very near the 90th degree and had passed the trine of Saturn by 4 degrees. The Sun and Venus in conjunction were passing away from the latter and steering towards the former. In both cases, at their sextiles, and were passing away from the quartile of Mars, towards which Mercury was steering very closely. The moon was going towards the trine of the same, very close, even in latitude, to the eye of Taurus, and the 25 degree of Gemini was rising. The 22 degree of Aquarius was in culmination. That's crazy. The particular triple configuration of that day, the sextile of Saturn and the Sun, the sextile of Jupiter and Venus, the quartile of Mercury and Mars, was proclaimed by a change in the air. For after a freeze of several days, on that very day, warmth appeared, melted the ice, and produced rain. However, I do not mean that all the aphorisms of the astrologers are defined and confirmed by this one. Say it again. Oh, I'm sorry. Are defended and confirmed by this one example. I do not convey to the heaven the guidance of human affairs. This philosophical observation is still an immense distance away from that stupidity or insanity, if you prefer to call it that. For to follow hard upon this example, I know a woman who was born under almost the same aspects with a temperament which was certainly very restless, but by which she not only has no advantage in book learning, that is not surprising in a woman, but also disturbs the whole of her town and is the author of her own lamentable misfortune. First, then, there was added to the aspects of the planets the daily imagination of my mother during her pregnancy, whose mother-in-law, my grandmother, an enthusiast for popular medicine, which was also practiced by my father, was an object of admiration. Secondly, there was added the fact that I was born a man, not a woman, a difference in sex which the astrologers seek in vain in the heaven. Thirdly, I take from my mother my bodily constitution, which is more suited to study than to other kinds of life. Fourth, my parents' means were limited. That is to say, there was no land for me to be born to and to cling to. Fifthly, there were schools available. There were examples available of the liberality. Is that what that is? Liberality of the magistrates to boys who were suited to study. Interpose here again from birth the differences which the planets make in qualities. For if the soul is a kind of light, it will also distinguish the red color of Mars from the whiteness of Jupiter and the leaden color of Saturn, Thus, it must be admitted that great assistance comes from Mars, not only as before towards industriousness, but also towards sharpness of talents, which is based on fiery vigor. And you may see that men who are outstanding in natural philosophy and expert in medicine are born under appropriate aspects of Mars with the Sun and Mercury, because, of course, greater sharpness is required, greater ingenuity for rooting out the mysteries of nature than for the other businesses of life and the studies which serve them. I shall impart something even more generously. It is the result of the elevation. It is the result of the elevation of Jupiter to the middle of the heaven that I delight more in geometry expressed in physical things than in the abstract, and showing in its appearance the dryness of Saturn, more I say in natural philosophy than in geometry, and because the gibbous moon in the famous constellation of the bow of Taurus would fill the fascinating faculty of the soul with images, though I have discovered that many of them agree with the nature of things as if they had been taken from the patterns of Proclus. But
He's,
if I
he's got a little side note here,
Okay.
saying some fuel here for our satirists. For it appears poverty presses them, as they have now chewed over my sole joke like this from my book on the new star at various times during the passage of 12 years. Okay. Sorry, I thought there was something more there.
But you never know. But if I should now speak of the outcome of my studies, what else, I ask, do I now find in the heaven which hints at it even lightly? The experts confess that there are parts of philosophy which are not to be despised, which have been either freshly unearthed or emended or clearly perfected by me. Yet in this my stars were not Mercury, as morning star in the angle of the seventh house in quartile with Mars, but they were Copernicus. They were Tycho Brahe, without whose books of observations everything which now been brought by me into the brightest daylight would lie buried in darkness. Not Saturn, the overlord of Mercury, but Rudolph and Matthias, each a Caesar Augustus, my overlords, not the lodging of the planets Capricorn for Saturn, but Upper Austria, the home of Caesar, and the ready liberality. What is that?
Yeah, liberality.
Of its nobles on an unusual pattern. In answer to my petition, in this, the angle is not the setting angle of a horoscope, but a terrestrial corner into which, by permission of the emperor, my overlord, I betook myself from a court where there was too much disturbance, and in which, throughout these years, turning now towards the evening of my life, I have been struggling over these harmonies and other things which I have in hand. An astrologer will seek in vain from the arrangement of the stars at my nativity the reasons for my discovery in the year 1596 of the proportions between the heavenly spheres, in the year 1604 of the way of seeing, in this year 1618 of the reasons why to each planet has fallen an eccentricity of a particular size, neither smaller nor larger. In the intervening years of my demonstration of the physics of the heavens and of the ways in which the planets move and of their true motions, and lastly, of the basis of the influentiality which is metaphysical of the heaven on this earth below. Those things were not due to the influence of the characteristics of the heaven on that little flame of my vital faculty which had just been lit and brought into action, but in part they were hidden in the innermost essence of my soul, according to the Platonic theory quoted above from Proclus, and in part they were received within by another route through my eyes, of course. In the one and only way in which, let me just say one thing. If for some reason, there you go. My dogs are barking. Okay, I just wanted to make sure they stop. Okay. My husband just walked in, so they have to bark. All right. The one and only way in which the arrangement of the stars at my nativity operated was that it both polished up the little flames of talent and judgment and urged my mind on to untiring toil, as well as increasing my desire for knowledge. In short, it did not inspire my mind or any of the faculties stated here, but roused it. From this example, it is easily apparent to anyone how far astrology is from being able to give an exact response from one single arrangement of stars at a nativity under any of the headings which it is the common custom to put to it, about the baby's parents, about its sex, about its wealth, about its children, about the number of its wives, about its religion, about its holding office, about its friends, about its enemies, about its inheritance, about its family, about its domiciles, about an infinity of other things. How far the astrologer can pronounce on length of life, indeed, that is what force the directions have, I shall state a little later. On the child's fortune, however, I see that I should now say something separately in agreement with what has been said above. There are three things on which a man's fortune seems to rest, insofar as they are natural: his mind, the physical constitution of his body, and his tutelary genius. Is that right, tutelary?
Sure.
Nobody is in doubt on the first of these. The second is more obscure and is not so commonly known. On the third, I could contribute nothing but conjectures. We have dealt with the first up to this point. That is with the mind, on which behavior depends. There is a familiar proverb of the common herd about them, that everyone is the architect of his own fortune. And the sum total of this part of the philosophy is contained in that saying. For come to represent them all, let us hasten our eyes on one kind of activities and manners, which was also previously touched on with the example of the woman. For human affairs are ordained in such a way that there is always a great abundance of men who are coarse and wise in the popular sense, not only among the common herd, but also among the magistrates and in holy orders. But they resent those who are independent, critical, or reformers, and consider them troublemakers. For someone to enjoy good fortune, then, I mean that which comes from gatherings of men, although he needs absolutely both good judgment in matters of morals and toil and industry in his own affairs, which are kept secret from the common herd, yet his mind should have some admixture of grossness. He should have the behavior of the people and a kind of way of doing things which will please the coarse populace. Minds which are too subtle and restless, unless they betake themselves to some retreat for study, or looked down on and despised for that very thing, usually create misfortunes for themselves. Thus, if anyone has adequate conjectures from the shape of the heaven at a nativity about qualities of the mind, he will make a conjecture which is not absurd about a man's fortune in general, but it will be only a conjecture and nothing else. Of course, he can also be wrong on account of the intervention of several cases, both supernatural and natural. For to derive one basis of a man's fortune, that is, opinions of his countenance, from the foregoing, the imagination of the mother does indeed impart much of it to the fetus during. Oh, okay. It must be a misprint over here. Much of it to the fetus during the whole time of gestation, so that both from unlucky parents and indeed also from other men or animals, frequently with the outward appearance of those encountered during pregnancy, countenance and behavior and a similar fortune which rests on their basis are transferred to the fetus. Nevertheless, as above, the mental patterns of Proclus were multiplied into spiritual, vital, and mobile patterns. That is, we're wrapped up with the ideas of life and movement. So also in this case, the arrangement of the heaven at nativity is impressed on the appearance of the countenance by a hidden power of the formative faculty and is recognized from the countenance of the child by a still more deeply hidden instinct of the beholders. And you may see that to those who are born under the conjectures of several planets before the sun, astrologers call them attendants, assemblies of men of the people are also attached as if by some spell. An example of that which is entrusted to the whole memory of posterity may be seen in Geronimo Cardano on the nativity of Luther. Though several causes for public commotion coincided, those who have such a birth, though no single definite form can be specified, are very strong in influence with the people, very strong in their voice in council, very strong in favor with the chief men of the state, whose nature indeed also corresponds. Thus often fortune is on the side of a man who has no merits of character and is not endowed with any other appropriate excellence of mind. Refer to this point the other things which I stated above on physical constitution and could be said at greater length. On the tutelary genius, divine oracles bear witness that to them individually is allotted the guardianship of individual men, that the right is also given of admonition and of intercession before the tribunal of God's providence. Here nature has no rights of property over sensible things. Yet if astrologers can foretell from the arrangement of the stars at nativity events which are clearly accidental, to use the natural way of speaking, that is such as did not come about from a man's bad behavior, from rashness or uncontrolled anger or lust, and do not depend on a low opinion of his countenance, which are the two bases of fortune expounded so far, as when a tile falling from a roof hits a passerby, when a bullet or an unexpected arrow hits someone strolling in the woods, when a sinking ship casts out unhappy travelers in the midst of the waves, when one man is caught in flames and destroyed, another is crushed by the collapse of a house or a mountain, and on the other hand, when one man enters into an inheritance which he did not hope for, another accidentally finds a treasure. If I say the arrangement of the stars at nativity contains indications of these events, which belong to the functions of the guardian angel beyond contradiction, then obstructions to this guardianship and support for it in the other direction must come from the star at nativity. Let the theologians see whether this contains an impious opinion in it, especially those who in great number write horoscopes and prognostications. I have knowledge which I do not know how to describe, gained from the experience of two men who were born under very violent arrangements of stars, and whose behavior was consequently no different. In fact, one of them played a game of jumping over precipices and snatching a rope in mid-flight, so that if he had missed it, it would at once have been all over with his life. However, they did not seem to have brought any harm on themselves by their rashness, for one of them was struck by lightning, the other by a lead bullet from a hunter. He was in ambush for wild beasts and had missed him with sight and ears. Nor do I see how the heaven can have such power against a man in spite of the genii, although it is found that its other powers are all exercised through a man's mind or body, which have no power against them. It has happened to me more than once that when I had been long and greatly tortured by pity for people who perished accidentally and seemed to me
entirely innocent.
Okay, there's like a typo or something.
Huge typo. Yeah.
Okay, to me entirely innocent. In the end, I learnt from those who were trustworthy that those people's lives had been outstandingly of the kind by which the good angel is easily driven away like a bee by smoke, and the man is usually given up to blind chance, like a chariot without a driver, as if he were emancipated from the paternal authority of God, his creator, and given up to his own whim, or rather to the tyranny of Satan. Whether some conclusion of that kind should be reached on the examples previously quoted, and those events should be attributed to divine nemesis, he alone knows who exerts hearts, who explores hearts, who visits the iniquity of the fathers on the sons unto the third and fourth generation. Indeed, may I be far from holding the same opinion about all who perish by accident. But the soothsayers cannot see such wickedness of life in the stars, for neither are there written in the shape of the heavens the divine aids against the sinful inclinations of our minds, into which the influence of heaven degenerates after our downfall, nor corrupting, but urging on the corrupted mind. Much less are there written in the lead color of Saturn. The lead colored, I'm sorry. Much less are there written in the lead color of Saturn, the red of Mars, as if in the law books, the kinds of punishment which are due for individual sins. Thus, although there is no immediate natural connection between these matters and heaven, once or twice in the last 20 years, I have put up for public consideration whether just as those spiritual guardians of provinces and peoples complain in chapter 9 of Daniel that they are obstructed by spirits which lie in wait, so also the genii of individual men are indeed naturally obstructed by the stars from being conveniently able to resist the powers of the air which lie in wait for us in mass, and those obstructions are foretold by the arrangement of the stars at birth. Perhaps that has also influenced the genius no less than the mind of the newborn, and some general bad luck for the child is the consequence, so that from this was born the proverb, troubles do not come singly. However, God does not frequently obstruct this course of the invisible workings of nature, because he has generally known how to bring some good even out of that obstruction of guardianship, so that if he is pleased with the one who is in danger, he yields to the good, but if he is displeased, he fulfills the measure of just punishments. Certainly, if the guardian angel cannot prevent an imminent evil, he at least gives warning in secret ways, so that he does not let his protege perish unprepared. Such
Presentiments.
what is it?
Presentiments.
Okay, such presentiments and warnings also preceded the recent collapse of a mountain in Risha. Let this third basis of a man's fortune then be merely conjectural, for I assert nothing definitely. We must now return to consideration of the essence of the vital faculty of the soul. For the question can be asked, if the imprint of the heaven exerts its influence only at the moment of nativity, whether the fetus therefore conceives the vital faculty of the soul only at birth, and whether I should say that before birth it is without a soul, it conceives its own vital active faculty in actual fact only at the moment when it is separated from its mother. Before that, it was illuminated by the rays of the little maternal vital flame through the umbilical vein and artery. This artery is inserted into the heart of the fetus by a separate passage from the two, by which afterwards feeds its own vital flame within. It drinks in blood in one case and air from the lungs in the other. This separate passage of the heart perishes on the first day of life and completely disappears, as I was shown in Prague in a recently produced piglet by George Horst, physician of the Landgrave of Hesse, who is very knowledgeable about the whole of nature. From that, I draw the inference that the heart of the fetus, while it is in the womb, is without the motion of systole and diastole, no less than it is without breathing, and so that the flame of its own life is not yet lit in it. And to insist more firmly on the very trustworthy analogy, as the smoke of a wooden roof which is scorched from a fire is to the flame which suddenly seizes it, so also is that which precedes it in the fetus to the vital faculty which is lit from the moment of birth or a little before. It is vital. In this vital faculty of man, then, which is thus lit at birth, there shines forth most clearly that which resembles a memory, as I have also shown above in the case of the earth soul. So great is the permanence of the imprint of the heaven and of all parts of the arrangement of the stars at nativity, so great is its durability in the soul, that it is not cast off before the end of life, as at all passages of the planets over the chief positions of that arrangement, this faculty is aroused exactly as if those positions were not bare images surviving in the soul of things which passed long ago, but true stars, and so not one but two suns, for example, were in the heaven and combined into one. And by that combination, the nature of the vital faculty were aroused in the way stated above. Very clear evidence of this fact, outweighing any exception, is in the affinity of the nativities under which parents and their children are born. For when the fetus is mature, the faculty of the soul, which is formative and in charge of generation, girds itself up to expel the fetus, and by that expulsion to light up the new vital faculty of the soul, particularly at the time when the stars return to the seats of the mother's or father's nativity, or to the same configurations, and remind the soul of themselves and of their heavenly imprint. See my book on the new star, page 43. What if this faculty does not only observe the true transits of the planets through their positions at nativity, but also the progressions of the parts of the heaven which held the planets at the time of birth into the chief positions of the arrangements which are established by exact integral numbers of days from the birth, observing the proportion of the day to the year, as each complete cycle of a year is attributed by Copernicus to the earth, and dispenses all its operations in that proportion throughout the man's life in such a way that in proportion as a year is longer than a day, an effect follows its sign in direction more slowly than the sign follows the birth in direction. He's like asking a question. I don't know. It doesn't sound like a question to me.
Yeah.
Hence, this heavenly impression does not only continue inactively, but also as it lasts, it propagates itself by a motion of existence to longer periods of life. What was that?
By motion of extension to longer periods of life.
Gotcha. Of course, this faculty is not only a circle, but it is an ideal circular motion, and that a twin one. And lastly, through its motion, it is also an ideal time. See the words of Proclus above on page 301. We can again look for an example of this in memory, which is a slightly superior faculty. For on a tablet, indeed, things are pictured only with a context of place, whereas in the memory, things which have happened are also pictured with an imprint of time. Lastly, in this business of directions, the imprint of situations and motions which have occupied time is repeated many times in operations, observing the sensible proportion in the universe of the daily revolution to the annual transport of the zodiac in such a way that the operations are now distinct in respect of time from their stimuli. You may say that along with the child's actual body, the time of the motions of the arrangements of the stars imprinted at his nativity also grows. Whatever then astrologers venture to predict about length of life from the arrangement of the stars, the whole of it is compressed into this chapter. When the prologues of the directions inform the vital faculty forum, as it were, the stage of the arrangement of the stars at nativity, in which year of life in particular, one or other of the humors is to overflow and be driven or shaken out of the body, that is, the stimulus, to nature to perform its extraordinary work, which is to yield to the prolongation of life. There is no death in the stars in their arrangement at birth. In the direction, not even the various forms of death. It is the material of the body which either suppresses the flame of life by overflowing or deserts it by failing, which obstructs the efforts of nature and turns them away to destruction. It is sin which has deprived the human race of the remedy of immortality, which it was once allowed, which even now drives away, obstructs, and repels the guardian angel from his watch on life against the assaults of demons, men, and the elements. But this matter would have to be dealt with at greater length in astrology, and I have dealt with it not too concisely in my book on the star, page 43, and in my A third party interposes, number 65, and following numbers. Also, it may be that I shall publish the books of Giovanni Pico della Mirandola with a commentary, if I am aware that I should be doing what would please students of philosophy, and if I am not deprived of the necessary means. Now, because I am hastening towards the end, I shall append a comparison between the vital faculty in man and the soul of the earth in respect of the influence of heavenly things. And the comparison seems to be that the soul of the earth is a circle of such a kind that it nowhere has a beginning or an end, and is not connected with any part of itself. But the vital faculty of man is compared to a circle which is, as it were, connected to several points. The reason is that the soul of the earth has no imprint from nativity, as it always stays the same and is never born or lit, whereas the nativity of man, which is recent and close to his death, has received the imprint of its origin, which marks off on the zodiac definite points of beginning and ending. And indeed, even if you attribute to the earth an imprint of its nativity from the first day of creation, yet the whole expanse of the heaven is always open to it, and it reckons no beginning or end or rising or setting point in it. However, the surface of the earth hides half the heaven from man and marks the signs of rising and setting. The logic of the comparison is therefore evident. Indeed, this comparison between the vital faculty as it is actually established and a circle joined to definite points is true. So even at the onset of disease, which is like a new life, that is a new activity of the vital faculty, or an extraordinary proceeding on its part, which is natural but beyond the nature of its usual constitution, is in striving to drive the harmful humor out of the body. The position which the moon occupied sheds its influence on the soul and takes on the power, as it were, of some true moon which is motionless in that degree. If the true moon in the heaven reaches the positions of quartile or opposition to it, the nature of the man is stirred to struggle with the disease. It is upon this fact that the theory of crisis depends, with which I have dealt sufficiently accurately in a third party interposes, number 70 and the following numbers. Let what has been said on the interior faculty of the human soul, Let what has been said on the inferior faculty of the human soul also, and on the whole of this matter, be sufficient for the present. Furthermore, I have discussed the soul up to this point, not with the intention of my part of calling students of divine philosophy away from their reading of the metaphysical authors, or to fasten my eyes on all those Greek, Arabic, and Latin interpreters of Plato and Aristotle, most profound in investigation, Platonius, Themistius, Simplicius, Porphyry, Alexander, Averroes, and the considerable number of his own race whom he quotes, and Boetius and J.C. Scaliger, the most recent and the most subtle, who discuss the soul and understanding, but with the intention of adding to their thoughts, as if by way of a supplement, what has been derived from my project and from the inmost treasury of this work on harmony, and not yet touched by them, as far as I know. As a result, then, those who after me will devote themselves to this metaphysical study will read the said authors, will compare these, as it were, discoveries with their reasoning, and will examine each by the gauge of the other with the unfettered criticism of reason, which I confess I have done very little at this juncture, will be able to render this part of the metaphysical knowledge indeed more famous and richer and more precise than any numbers. To turn that towards the glory of the name of God, blessed above all, and creator of the invisible, of the visible and the invisible, and to the increase of those who study holiness and innocence of life, And lastly, to the eternal salvation of a great many souls. I pray in supplication to that very God, the three in one. End.
All right, we did it. What do you...
I know, right? It's a challenge.
No, you
That's
did great,
tough reading.
Helene. That was a really nice reading.
Yeah,
That was good.
We've said
No,
it many times before. It's written in a very convoluted language, so.
Well, I like the section where he describes, because he's bringing like nuance that's obviously absent from the minds of many of those practicing astrology, and I liked how he at different ways was very playful, right? Sort of like you're like, well, does he believe what he's saying or does he not? And you know, like at one point he's going through his own. This is my favorite part of this whole book, where he's like going through his own star sign at birth or his own configuration, really, really rigorously describing his own industriousness and genius, and then he's like, but you know, this other girl was born at the exact same moment as me, and she's like just a wreck. so like, wait a minute, what? It was pretty funny.
He both affirms it, but then he says you can step outside the idea of your nativity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
which is everything I ever learned about astrology. That the most important thing on a chart was the point in the center, which is generally described as free will.
That's often left out. That's very important.
Yeah, well, that was the tradition that I was taught anyway, a Western tradition.
Yeah. Well, here I cannot resist because of my medical schooling that what he calls vital soul is called nowadays as the autonomous nervous system and the inferior part of the motor system. And I think, Paul, what you say is very interesting because even nowadays, we recognize that inferior part of ourselves. It depends very much on the environment and nature. For example, when we are in a hot environment, we will sweat, okay? And it doesn't depend on the will, on free will. And it's simply reality. And I like very much the old way to say things, the vital soul. And when you have higher faculties like reason, well, you have the mind, which is the center, and reason, which is the circular motion of the mind. So it's an old way to speak things, which still is quite interesting, even if we have more biological details nowadays. But the upper part is certainly philosophical and is not encompassed by biology, that's for sure.
Metaphysics.
Yeah. Our fate is not in our stars, but in ourselves, that we're underlings, although the stars have a role to play as well.
There's an influence.
There's an influence. Yeah, there's an influence, of course. Yeah.
I mean, to give you another simple example, my astrology teacher used to say, as I said before, the point of the center is the most important. But some people have a harder time. In other words, the force of what's happening in the nativity chart can weigh on them in such a way that it's very hard for them to find that free will to act outside of the constraints of their birth chart.
Yeah.
Almost implying a lack of free will. There's always free will, but I happen to have an example of a friend of mine who's, I don't want to go into details, but at a relatively young age, 19 onwards, just went off the rails in a lot of ways. And, when I did his chart years later, it was like, gee, this guy had so much to battle. It's no wonder he didn't get beyond a certain point, which included dying young, unfortunately.
So you believe all that?
When you see it happen in front of you, and then you see a template as to how it might have had impetus, if you like, from the universe. This is what we've just been reading after all. It's hard to dismiss it. I'm not saying, I'm a firm believer by any means, but it's hard to dismiss it as not being worth consideration. And I could quote a few other examples from my time when I studied astrology, and in the end, it led to me saying, this is too powerful. There's too much that I'm not prepared to deal with at this stage in my life. I was too young, too inexperienced.
Yeah.
The world of the occult generally just like, okay, I approached it. I learned a lot of things, especially about mythology, but there were certain aspects of it that I simply said to myself, without a teacher, somebody who really knows this minefield, this is not an area you want to go wading in, without an aqualung and a floater.
Yeah.
And probably a spear gun as well.
In the age of newspapers, every paper had a horoscope for that day.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I refused to read it. I would read it like the next day just to see, but I didn't want it to influence me for that day.
I would ignore
I
it
didn't
totally,
trust
mate.
it.
I would ignore it totally. Full stop. Bang.
I was curious though.
Yeah.
But I think that there is a part, what Pon said, I think is very interesting, because there's a part which is destiny, okay? And there's a part who is free
Yeah.
will. And sometimes the part belonging to destiny is so heavy that it would have taken a extraordinary conjunction of circumstances of teaching to rise above that destiny.
Mm-hmm.
Kepler, he said something about the soul of the earth. It has no imprint of its nativity, or I assume its birth, where we humans, I guess we do. I kind of find that kind of interesting.
Yeah. And
that whole idea of destiny, of course, feeds into Richard Dawkins and his Selfish Gene, when that one was published. It seemed like there was a binary choice, determinism and non-determinism, that dominated the philosophical airways in newspapers and articles and various things that I saw.
Yeah. Once again, determinism and free will. The lower trigram and the upper trigram.
Yep.
Okay.
I mean, it was a real dichotomy, because Richard Dawkins made it, open knowledge right from the start that he was an atheist.
Yeah.
And that selfish gene idea fits in perfectly with that materialist view of the world, randomness and all of that sort of thing. But a determining randomness. Yeah. You are what your genes determine you to be.
But I would suggest that he was not really an atheist, because he wanted to propose a belief. He still believed in a metaphysical framework. And if you believe in a metaphysical framework, you're not really an atheist, fundamentally speaking. Maybe you're wrong in your supposition, but your path is not the path of an atheist.
I think both he and Christopher Hitchens, most of the railings that they do against religion are directed more to the politics of church rather than the sheer metaphysics of religion per se. I haven't read anything by it, and I've got both Dawkins, I forget the title of it, but, his tirade against religion, and Christopher Hitchens, God is not good, etc., etc. I mean, wonderful writings. I mean, distinct, how do I put this? Legitimate criticisms, if you like, but there's very little metaphysics in it.
Thank you, Paul. Yes, I think the same. In the sense that it's a poverty of thinking and of imagination. It's not because the leaders of an institutions are unworthy that the metaphysical ideas should be destroyed.
Yeah.
Or rejected.
Yeah.
Let's not mix philosophy and politics.
Can I say something? Remember we stopped reading, and I had read ahead like this one chapter, and he talked about knowability versus something else. I don't even remember exactly what it was and which comes first, all that.
Congruence.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, I guess what I wanted to say is that so it seems like we have no ability to know an awful lot. And I was just wondering if, that no ability was talking about was the same as like no ability to learning to be creative, to solve problems, and sky's the limit type thing, I guess.
Takes a lot of work.
Can you sum up the nobility and conjunction thing real quick, Conley?
Well, nobility is the epistemological journey. It could be through geometry, through algebraic, through medicine, through anything. Okay.
Through music.
You choose the path that is most suitable for you. If
Okay.
music, if you have musical talents, painting, if you have painting talents, etc. So it's what the Japanese and the Chinese call the Tao. Okay, the way. Okay, you choose your way, but if you go deeply into a way, because of your specific talents, you will go into that infinite epistemological journey. For example, for Kepler, it has been mathematics and astronomy. Okay, but the true adventure is not mathematics or astronomy. Those were domains or tools for him to travel the infinite epistemological journey he calls knowability.
Okay.
For you, maybe
awesome.
it's music or something else.
I think that was the best
Me?
takeaway of this whole Kepler thing for me was this knowability. I love
Absolutely. Absolutely. And for him, it was the path to God, okay, to reality, to beauty, goodness, and truth, if I want to go back to my favorite philosopher. So, and what is beautiful that is he can make the distinction between congruence, the measure, the harmonic proportions, okay? And he's not demeaning harmonic proportions, but what he wants to say that harmonic proportions is the expression of something deeper, which is the travel of the infinite epistemological journey, or what he calls knowability.
Okay.
It's like
Quality over
All right.
quantity. Quality over quantity. If I want to
Okay.
say things simple.
Yep.
all those geometric
are I
exercises.
say KNOW ability, like ability to know?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Knowability, absolutely.
Okay. Helene, could you say again what you said?
The last thing, it's just that the whole.
I was
What?
I was just struggling to understand what you guys were saying when you said no ability.
So it's in one of these chapters. I don't know if it was 7, maybe. I don't know. And he goes back and forth between knowability and congruence, and it had something to do with like a point and a circle, and which comes first, the chicken or the egg, knowability or congruence. And it was really actually really good. And that's really, I think,
it's chapters 1 to chapter 5, but it's essentially chapter 4 and 5. But if you want to understand that, it's truly chapter 1 to 5.
Okay.
When we were playing with the compass, making the triangles, the circles, like as we were doing it, we like now that we've done it, we know like a little bit more about the triangle to the circle, the line, the point, the the ratios between the circles and the squares, like just by doing it. That's what I kind of say is knowability.
Yeah. Yeah. But doing it, let's not forget that the hands is connected to the mind. Eh? So when you move your hands, there are things appearing in the mind. And that is the knowability for the mind. Okay. Or the reason,
mind understands.
Yeah. Or the reason.
What we did.
The reason, because let's use Kepler's terminology. Let's give him some honor. He's saying that the center of the soul, of the superior soul, okay, because he's not speaking of the vital soul, of the superior soul is a center, and it's called the mind. But when that mind is moving, it makes circular motions. He calls reason, but circular motions of the minds, okay, and not circular motions of the hands. The minds, because of those circular motions, will direct the hands to move, but the hands, by moving, would have a retroaction on the reason, on the circular motions of the mind. Okay, so it works both ways.
Feedback loops everywhere, folks.
Yes, and a little bit like the present plutocrats thinking that if they send the industrial capacity overseas, they will retain the pure designing capacity, which is very stupid, because they forgot precisely that you need to such things to activate the brain, and it works both ways.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's true. Like even on a certain level, you could think about the intellectual activity of what happens when swimming occurs, but unless you actually test it out by swimming physically, the brain is not gonna turn that into real knowledge, which involves the whole body moving, the interactivity,
The breath for air.
yeah, even all of that. So same thing for construction, playing an instrument. There's the intellectual ivory tower component, which might give you some nice theory, but until you actually start experimenting in reality and working the body, it won't take on the same weight in the mind.
And we talked about this last week too.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've touched on this aspect before several times, I think.
Quite a bit. Yeah.
That's a wild thought, though, that he just said. By shifting all the jobs overseas, so-called third world countries, they thought that they were just, decimating our society. In a lot of ways they did, but they also helped to inspire the process of us waking up by depriving us of so much.
They wouldn't agree with that, but yeah.
But they also ended up helping those societies to grow simply because of that tactile learning and all of the connections it makes.
Good. Yeah.
That's a wild thought.
Well said.
And it's another example that they just shoot themselves in the foot without realizing it. Their system cannot sustain itself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I think that it was inevitable. Hubris is a emotion that is blinding the soul. And when the soul is blinded, you take very stupid decisions.
A lot of hubris around at the moment, Kwan.
Well, I have the weakness to agree with you, Paul. I don't know why.
But it's also just wild to enter into these discussions again. It just makes me angry. I've got to figure out how to make Telegram work on my computer so I can read up on everything you guys have been doing there. But
should be able to just download
our
it.
minds are getting permission to think again and grow again the way we actually were intended to. Just imagine the kind of discoveries that are going to be made in the next few years, the kinds of limits to growth that we are just going to blow away because minds are expanding again. It's going to be amazing. We have an amazing future ahead of us.
And you'll be contributing to it.
I hope.
Each in our own small way, we are.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful thing. Like when you look at the world in which a lot of these great miraculous discoveries and revolutions occurred, it kind of you always tend to get a lot of darkness in the world around which a Kepler emerges as a beacon of light, or a Leibniz. It's just a world in turmoil, and these are people who, it's like that tension is in a certain way almost like something which compels genius to emerge. And that's just a beautiful irony of the universe. That often is it necessary? Is it necessary that if we get into a world of actual mature human beings where we don't create unnecessary situations of dark age conditions, will we no longer have geniuses arise? I don't think so. There's other ways of awakening that sense that didn't require mass death. But despite that, the fact that it can still occur in such a powerful way is quite interesting. Yeah. That's probably a place for the artists, I would say, to generate or evoke the sense of the deep, awareness of what injustice actually is in the heart of somebody who doesn't have to physically experience injustice and destruction. But if you have well done art and drama, it can.
That would be it. You're right.
Yeah. I hope. Otherwise, we have to periodically
Yeah.
just do mass
Maybe.
figurative violence. That'd be terrible.
The knowability is just so inspiring. I'm so psyched. I am so psyched.
Yeah. But
All right,
even in
guys.
oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
Quan, go on.
I just want to say that even in Kepler's time, it was quite catastrophic, socially speaking.
yeah.
Okay.
So bad.
So, I mean, I don't mean that you have to get a catastrophic social situation to kindle creativity, but it's one of the possible situation which kindles creativity. But it can be otherwise, of course.
Yeah, sometimes catastrophes just make more catastrophes.
Yeah, sometimes. I think that precisely we were speaking of the fact that with certain person the destiny component sometimes is so heavy that it's very difficult to activate the free will component. And I would say that for a society or a civilization, you might come to a point that the destiny component is so heavy that that civilization wouldn't be utterly destroyed with no return.
Mm.
Yeah.
That was sobering.
Yeah.
Well, life in the
better,
U.S.
better chat with a few more of my US friends before that happens.
Well, let's do the following here. I know this week Cynthia and I are going to Vancouver for 10 days, so we're gonna miss 2 Wednesdays. So I'm gonna talk to you, Quan, and we can discuss whether we want to take a pause or whether you have an idea of a reading you'd like to lead over those 2 weeks while we're away. We'll discuss it, and we'll put out an email to let people know. If you don't get an email, it means there's no reading next week. If you do get an email, pop on like usual, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, Quan, do a reading for us.
Do you have a suggestion, Kenny?
I could think of something and put it in the Kepler
and the Telegram group. Yep.
Telegram. Yeah.
Yeah.
My mind's a blank right now.
Yeah, sure. And we can discuss some basic notions of philosophies too. So we will all be expert in philosophical babble.
Something Oriental.
It can be Oriental, can be Western too. But in the sense that I noticed that sometimes we are not comfortable with the fact that a word can have many meanings, for example, and in philosophy, it's full of that.
But we have Helene and Susan who will always bring it back to common sense.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, but I love that part of the discussion earlier. And it's really important to explore the original meanings of words and then also the different ways those words are today, because that's one of the things that they've tried so hard to take away from us. They keep changing the meaning of words.
Yeah,
So
they
for
take
us
away
to take that back to ourselves.
They take away the metaphysical aspects of in the language.
That's what my parents said when I was a kid, that we were changing the way words meant to them.
That's
And
interesting.
now we're the old people saying
having a gay old time means something very different today than it did when you were watching the Flintstones, eh?
Collateral damage is not as confronting as civilian casualties. Yeah, we're changing the language every day.
Cool. Well, I think that means something epistemologically stimulating is going to happen next Wednesday. So I wish I could be here to experience it, but I'm hoping somebody records it, and we'll do the usual putting out the invitation. And Quan, we'll just interface a little bit before that, so I know what to send into the invitation realm when that happens. Cool. So,
all good.
Guys, thank you y'all for this Keplerian experience. I'll see y'all in 3 weeks.
Okay.
Thank
Great
you.
to see you much healthier too, mate.
Yeah.
Have a good evening.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Good night.